Good evening, and welcome back. Curl in close to the fire tonight and drift with me to a motel room off a Oklahoma City highway to New Year's Eve 2001, and to a robbery that was supposed to end with scared men and stolen cash, but instead left a 19-year-old farm worker dying on a motel carpet and two brothers on a collision course with a death chamber. One of those brothers, Tremane Wood, would stand up in court and say, "I am the one who did the stabbing." Jake, as he was called, would get life without parole. The other brother, Tremane Wood, would be sentenced to die. Not because a jury was sure he drove the knife into Ronnie Whipp's chest, but because they decided he shared responsibility for a robbery that turned into murder. And now, Tremane Wood sits on Oklahoma's death row at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, with an execution by lethal injection scheduled for November 13th, 2025, just days away. His fate hanging between a clemency recommendation and the final decision of Governor Kevin Stitt. So pull that blankie a little closer and come, because tonight we're walking through a story about a New Year's Eve party, a setup at a Ramada, a dead young man far from home, and a justice system that decided only one brother would face the needle. His name was Ronnie Whipp. He was 19 years old, a migrant farm worker from rural Montana, traveling for seasonal work with a friend named Arnold Kleinsasser. Picture two young men on the road at the turn of the year, far from the fields and sky they knew, passing through Oklahoma on their way toward Texas for harvest work. Police would later say that's what brought them south. Long days in other people's fields, paychecks earned one crop at a time. On New Year's Eve 2001, they ended up in Oklahoma City's Bricktown district, a rebuilt warehouse area full of bars, neon, and people squeezing a whole year's worth of bad decisions into one last night. Somewhere in that crowd, their path crossed with two women, Lenita Bateman and Brandy Warden. Whiff and Kleinsasser saw a pair of young women out for the night. What they couldn't see was the plan that had already been forming around them. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was at the Bricktown Brewery that night, another group was celebrating. Jake Wood, his younger brother, Tremane Wood, Lenita, and Brandy. 4 people moving through the night as a unit. According to court records, somewhere between drinks and closing time, the idea took shape. Lenita and Brandy would pretend to be sex workers, lure men back to a motel room, and then the Wood brothers, masked and armed, would burst in to rob them. It wasn't a new plan. In fact, it wasn't the first time it had been used that night. Earlier, the same basic script had been played out on another pair of men. That robbery ended with stolen money and fear. But no one died. When Ronnie Whipp and Arnold Kleinsasser met the two women, they were just looking at the surface. A fun end to a long year, companionship on a holiday far from home. Lenita and Brandy agreed to go with them to a motel to keep the party going. They all left Bricktown behind and headed for a Ramada Inn in North Oklahoma City. What the men didn't know was that their room number had already been written in the middle of a robbery blueprint. The 4 of them checked into a room. Surveillance footage would later show Lenita and Brandy at the desk, renting the space that would become a crime scene. Inside the room, what began as flirting turned into business. The women suggested a price for sex. Whipp and Kleinsasser didn't have enough cash, so Brandy drove Arnold to an ATM. He pulled out the money, handed it over, and they went back to the room. To Wiv and Kleinsasse, this was still a choice. Maybe a risky one, maybe one they wouldn't brag about later, but a decision they'd made. To the Wood brothers, watching from outside this small orbit, it was step 2 in a robbery plan already in motion. In the room, there's nervous conversation. The women disappear into the bathroom together. Lenita makes a phone call from the room, not to her mum, as she pretends, but to let the Wood brothers know which room to hit and when. Out loud, she ends the call with, "Mom, I love you." A little stage line to keep suspicion low. But suspicion is already seeping into the room. At some point, the men realize the deal has shifted. There may not be any sex at all, just talk and stalling. They ask for their money back. Tempers rise. What they don't know is that the real danger isn't in the bathroom. It's in the hallway, and it was moving closer. A pounding hits the motel door. "Brandy, you in there? Brandy, you ready to go home?" The voice outside calls her name, like an impatient parent checking on a daughter. Inside, Whip senses trouble. He tells Kleinsasse not to open the door. He urges him to call the police, but the moment doesn't hold. In the chaos, the women grabbing at the phone, pretending to call 911, the demands, the shouting. Something gives. The women make a break for it, racing out the door into the night. They run to a white car in the lot, the one driven by the Wood brothers, and get in. Seconds later, 2 masked men force the door and rush into the room. One is larger, carrying a gun. That's Jake Wood. The other is smaller, wielding a knife. That's Tremane Wood. At least that's what the surviving witness will later testify, and what the jury ultimately believes. The men shout demands. "Give us the money. Give us everything you've got." The gun is shoved against Kleinsasse's head as he scrambles to hand over whatever's left in his wallet. While Jake focuses on Arnold, the smaller man with the knife turns toward Ronnie Wiv. In the tight space of the room, a struggle explodes. Bodies slamming into furniture, hands grasping for control of knife and gun. Kleinsasse hears one of the men say, "Just shoot the bastard," and then hears a gunshot. But later, the medical examiner will confirm that no bullet ever struck Whip. His fatal wound will come from steel, not lead. The fight surges into the bedroom area. Arnold sees blood on Ronnie, spreading fast. He realizes this isn't just a robbery anymore. Someone is going to die here. Faced with that, his survival instinct takes over. While the 2 masked men are tangled with Ronnie, Arnold bolts. He rushes out into the night toward the motel office, pounding on the locked door, begging for help. But fear follows him. Before anyone lets him in, he panics and runs again, this time hiding at a nearby apartment complex, watching the motel from a distance until morning breaks. By the time he gathers the courage to come back, police lights are already painting the parking lot blue and red. Inside that room, Ronnie Whip lies dead from a stab wound driven deep into his chest. A wound that pierced his heart and lung and bled out his future on a motel floor hundreds of miles from home. In the hours after the killing, the 4 conspirators circle back together. Surveillance footage from earlier in the evening shows the 2 women and the 2 brothers buying ski masks and gloves at a Walmart, pieces of the costume they wore into that motel room. Phone records show calls from the motel room to the pager and home associated with the Wood brothers. The white car Arnold saw leaving the lot is linked back to them. When police start pulling threads, they don't unravel in random directions. They lead straight back to Tremane Wood, his brother Jake, Lenita Bateman, and Brandy Warden. The state charges all four with first-degree murder, robbery with firearms, and conspiracy. But over time, their fates will diverge in dramatic ways. Brandy Warden cuts a deal first. She agrees to testify, pleads guilty to accessory after the fact and conspiracy, and is sentenced to a long term of years, decades behind bars. Lenita is tried separately, convicted of felony murder, robbery with firearms, and conspiracy, and receives life with the possibility of parole for murder, plus more than a century for the robbery. Jake, the older brother, goes to trial too. He's convicted of felony murder and robbery, but his sentence is life without parole, not death. Later, from his own defense chair, he will testify that he, not Tremane, stabbed Ronnie Whiff, and that his younger brother wasn't even there. Other witnesses and evidence contradict that claim, and the jury doesn't buy it. In 2019, Jake Wood dies by suicide in prison, taking with him whatever private truth he held about that motel room. And then there's Tremane. In 2004, a jury in Oklahoma County convicts Tremane Wood of first-degree felony murder for the killing of Ronnie Whiff, robbery with firearms, after former conviction of a felony and conspiracy to commit a felony. Under Oklahoma's felony murder rule, the state doesn't have to prove that he personally delivered the fatal stab wound, only that a death occurred during a felony he willingly took part in. But at trial, prosecutors go further. They argue that he was the man with the knife, that he was the one who drove it into Whipp's chest during the struggle, and that the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, inflicting conscious suffering before death. The jury finds three aggravating factors: that he knowingly created a great risk of death to more than one person, that the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, and that he posed a continuing threat to society. On the strength of those aggravators, they recommend death for the murder and life sentences on the other counts. The judge follows their recommendation. In 2007, Oklahoma's Court of Criminal Appeals upholds the conviction and sentence. To many people in that courtroom, the story seems over. A young man is dead. His killer, or at least one of the men responsible for the chain of events that left him dead, has been sentenced to die. But time has a way of peeling back layers that didn't show up in the first telling. Years later, details emerged that cast a long shadow over the fairness of the trial that put Tremane on death row. The woman who served as jury foreperson in 2004 remembers feeling pressured to change her vote to guilty. Crying in the hallway, haunted by the responsibility placed in her hands, she now publicly campaigns against his execution, saying she wishes she had held her ground. It also comes out that Tremane's trial lawyer was fighting battles of his own during the time he was supposed to be fighting hardest for his client. The Oklahoma Bar Association eventually suspends that attorney for alcohol and cocaine addiction. He later admits he failed Tremane, that he didn't do the investigation he should have done, didn't present the powerful mitigation evidence that was available, and didn't give the jury a full picture of the man they were deciding whether to kill. Post-conviction filings allege that prosecutors also withheld information, that some witnesses who testified received benefits or deals that weren't disclosed to jurors, asked to judge their credibility. All of this becomes part of a legal odyssey that stretches through state and federal courts. Appeals, habeas petitions, claims of ineffective assistance of counsel, claims that key evidence was hidden, claims that the felony murder rule itself is being stretched past any semblance of fairness. Meanwhile, advocates point to the disparities in how the 4 co-defendants were treated. Same robbery, same plan, same night, one woman, decades. Another, life with parole plus 101 years. Jake, life without parole, even after admitting he stabbed Whip. Tremane, death. That contrast becomes a rallying cry for people who argue that Oklahoma's use of the death penalty is inconsistent and unjust. And through it all, one fact never changes. Ronnie Whip is still dead, and his family is still living with that absence. While the lawyers argue in distant courtrooms, Tremane's world shrinks to a cell on H Unit at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister. Death row. There, the rules are rigid, the days repetitive, the future always framed by the possibility that a date will someday be set and actually stick. Over time, a very different picture of his life inside emerges, one painted not by defense attorneys, but by the state's own investigators. Oklahoma's Attorney General, Gentner Drummond, presents evidence that while on death row, Tremane has used contraband cell phones, coordinated drug dealing, and even ordered a beating of another inmate, requesting that a video of the assault be sent back to him. Photographs show him with wads of cash. Videos appear to show drug use behind bars, and text messages suggest an active role in a criminal economy that never quite stops at the prison gate. To Drummond, this is proof that Tremane remains a continuing threat, even inside maximum security. Evidence, he says, that death is the only way to ensure the safety of Oklahomans. To his supporters, it's a more complicated picture. A man who has made bad choices, including from death row, but who has also grown into a mentor, a writer, a grandfather trying to send more wisdom outward than harm. In his own words to the Pardon and Parole Board, he compares life on death row to quicksand. The more you struggle trying to get out, sometimes the deeper you sink into the culture. He admits his role in the robbery. He admits misconduct in prison, but he continues to insist that he is not the man who killed Ronnie. "I'm not a monster," he tells the board. "I'm not a killer. I never was, and I never have been." Whether you believe him or not, that claim sits at the center of the showdown now unfolding in the last days before November 13th. On November 5th, 2025, Tremane appears by video before the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board. He speaks about the robbery. He speaks about his childhood trauma, about being sexually abused as a child. He acknowledges his failures, his misconduct in prison. His lawyers argue that his death sentence is the product of a fundamentally broken system. Ineffective counsel impaired by drugs and alcohol, undisclosed benefits to key witnesses. A felony murder law that doesn't require proof of intent to kill, and the sentencing outcome completely out of step with his co-defendants. The Attorney General's office pushes the opposite direction, laying out photos, text messages, and disciplinary records to show that even on death row, Tremane has been dealing in violence and drugs, that clemency should be reserved for those who show remorse and transformation, and that he does not qualify. When the arguments are done, 5 people vote. It is not unanimous, it is not easy, but by a 3-2 margin, the board recommends clemency. Specifically, that Tremane Wood's sentence be commuted from death to life in prison. The room where his supporters are watching erupts in tears and hugs. Outside, the headlines start to run. Divided Oklahoma board recommends clemency for man scheduled for lethal injection. But the story doesn't end with that vote. Not in Oklahoma. Because clemency, there is only a recommendation. The power to turn it into reality belongs to one person, Governor Kevin Stitt, a man who has granted clemency only once while presiding over 16 executions. After that vote, the governor's office said Kevin Stitt would meet with Wood's attorneys, with the Attorney General's office, and with the victim's family before making any final decision. So the state waited, and Tremane Wood waited too, carrying the weight of a clock that had been stopped by a recommendation, but not yet silenced by an answer. On execution day, November the 13th, the final appeals ran their course. The US Supreme Court declined to intervene. The machinery of the state moved into position. But then, even as the final minutes narrowed, the Department of Corrections was told to hold, because the decision was still not finished. And less than a minute before the execution was set to proceed, Governor Stitt made his call. He accepted the board's recommendation. He commuted Tremane Wood's death sentence to life without the possibility of parole. In a written statement, Stitt said he reached that decision after prayerful consideration. He pointed to the fact that Wood's brother, convicted in the same case, had received life without parole, and he called it the same punishment he believed Wood should carry. He also acknowledged the victim's family, praising their Christian forgiveness and love. In other words, the state didn't take Tremane Wood's life that night. The warrant dissolved into a different kind of sentence. After the commutation, Wood met with his attorneys for hours as officials began moving him off death row. Later that same day, during a routine check in his new cell, an officer found him unresponsive. Out of caution, he was transported to a nearby hospital. Corrections officials later said the incident appeared to be caused by dehydration and stress. Wood later indicated he felt fine, and officials suggested he may have rolled off his bunk. So the record ends here. Tremane Wood was not executed. His sentence was commuted, and he is now serving life without parole in the state of Oklahoma. In the end, sometimes justice does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrives like a held breath and a last-second pen stroke that changes everything. Thanks for listening. This has been Fireside Crime Stories, where the darkest tales are always read by firelight. If you haven't already, subscribe. And before you go, toss a little fuel on the fire. Hit that like button, ring that bell, so you'll be the first to know when another fire's burning and another story's being told. Until next time, rest well.